Recently, I've been writing the game mastering chapter for my TTRPG Swiftguard. And just to get an idea of what might be the most helpful bullet points to hit, I was perusing other TTRPGs that I enjoy to see what they had to say about game mastering. And one thing that stood out to me is that the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, and I'm pretty sure they had it in 2014 as well, has a section called Know Your Players, where it describes a lot of different player preferences and thought patterns, and how, as a dungeon master, you can make your game appeal to those player types. Now, while I think that some of this framing can be helpful, a lot of the time I have seen DMs that read this part of the book kind of get stuck in their thinking, where they apply player behavior and what to do with that in a very linear function. So, for example, if I have a player that loves acting, I should do this and then they should have more fun. And, as usual with these kind of things, because TTRPGs are this social game, I want to dive into it a little bit more, and maybe come up with some ways to think about how we observe players in a way that we can find ultimately more helpful at the table. Hi, I'm John, this is Dragon Mind, where we discover our best selves through gaming, and today we are talking about shifting our perspective from knowing our players to simply observing them. Let's get into it. Before we get rolling, I want to take a minute to shout out Hit Play Pulse, a new app by Tickle Engine that builds ambiance at your table through cinematic music and sound effects. Ever since my days as a professional game master, music has played a huge role in setting the emotional tone I want at my table. And I have for sure spent plenty of sessions struggling with a laptop and speaker setup, not to mention whatever software I was trying to run in order to get everything to run smoothly. With Hit Play Pulse, all of that work is streamlined into a simple and intuitive interface, with cinematic music composed by professionals right at your fingertips. My favorite part? This app is AI free. I recently made the embarrassing mistake of buying a map pack that I discovered was all AI art, which has made me really skeptical of trying out new products, especially for TTRPGs. Thankfully, Hit Play Pulse is by humans for humans, so that your TTRPG can play and sound like a cinematic masterpiece. You can back Hit Play Pulse on Kickstarter now for a chance to purchase its all-content pass, unlocking all current and future content. Head to Kickstarter now with the link in the description. Alright, knowing versus observing. To some of you, this may just seem like a simple difference in semantics. However, I've observed over the years that a lot of times our language can really help change our perspective on a situation, especially for game masters. For example, like I mentioned earlier, even the term knowing your players tends to lead to some linear, mechanical thinking. If I do this, this should happen. And a lot of game masters over the years have told me their frustrations that no matter what they seem to be trying, they're not getting the result that they're looking for. And again, the player types can be helpful, at least as a place to start. For example, in the Dungeon Master's Guide, it says some players are going to enjoy acting as their characters. They'll enjoy the game if you give their character room to breathe by giving them time to develop their personality and backstory. Whereas for a player that enjoys fighting, it helps to spring unexpected combat encounters. Again, this isn't bad advice to try, but I think where it goes wrong is the promise of the result that you'll get through the method of trying to engage that player type. For example, I had a DM in the past that recognized, or at least thought, that I was a player that really enjoyed combat. So there were times in the session we would be in the middle of a scene and suddenly everything would be halted for fighting to break out. Personally, I didn't really like that part of the game. Yes, I did like the tactical exchange of combat, but I liked it more in kind of the sense of The Witcher 3, where you identify and then investigate some sort of enemy creature, determine its weaknesses, and then form a game plan. And yes, that game plan may get interrupted, or players may fail their roles, but I liked the idea of kind of gathering information and then using our research to overcome some kind of foe. When all the fights were just a surprise thrown in, it really felt like what we were doing was either random or just the same tried and true methods to help us succeed more often than not. By contrast, I personally recommend that game masters become masterful observers, where yeah, it's totally okay to try something, but you want to observe and get feedback about if your players actually enjoyed it and what about it they enjoyed. And again, if you try something and it doesn't work, doing your best not to take that too personally. Again, in that earlier example, I don't blame that GM for throwing in an unexpected fight and then me just not enjoying that part of the session. You don't know if a player will like something, even that player, like even I didn't know I wouldn't like it until the GM actually tried it. But I think where a lot of GMs get stuck is instead of observing, oh, I thought John liked combat and he didn't seem to like it, they get stuck in that linear thinking of John likes combat, we have to try doing this more and more to make it work. When instead, you take off the pressure of being someone that needs to know, and rather someone that just observes, a lot of times it frees you up to try different things, and then be able to analyze what happens after the fact. For Swiftguard, I do find the idea of kind of player types helpful, but instead of thinking of like, this is a behavior, this is what you should do, instead it's more about observing player archetypes. Now I am going to reach back into my catalog a little bit and bring up some concepts that I explored in 5-element attention. We're looking for player behaviors as signals of how we can shape our game to squeeze the most juice out of it and have the most fun at the table. So because in Swiftguard I'm going to be presenting these archetypes in alphabetical order, they are going to be out of cycle of the element cycle presented in 5-element attention, but we'll still link the elements and talk about them a little. So first is the archetype of the actor, which does neatly line up with the whole acting behavior in the DMG. The actor is connected to the element of fire, and they love embodying their characters and experiencing all the spontaneity that comes with. Like the DMG says, actors do love creating complex personalities and expansive backstories for the purpose of better embodying their character's personality. It's a little different than creating the backstory from the perspective of the writer, which we'll talk about in a bit, in that for actors, it's about creating context so that they can most faithfully portray the character they're interested in. If you're recognizing a player that seems to fit the actor archetype, you just want to give them room to roleplay. As the GM, you want to be patient in allowing the actor to really take up the space of their role, while of course keeping an eye on the interest level of the other players. When in balance, an actor is really going to inject a lot of energy at your table. You'll notice your players laughing a lot more, improvising new things just to keep the ball rolling, and really expressing more of the social interaction side of the narrative. Again though, like I mentioned in problem players, an actor can easily start stealing the spotlight by shining too brightly. If that starts to happen, starting to position them in more of a support role where they start to really shine a light on the other players at the table is a great way to keep everyone engaged. The sense they add to your table is energy. Now, a little bit related to the actor is the explorer, who's connected to the element of wood and really just wants things to move along or explore every little bit of whatever scene that you set up. They love discovering new parts of the world. Even if they aren't super interested in the deep lore, they at least like discovering it. And they love pushing boundaries. So in a lot of ways, this will be the player that describes some really chaotic plan just to see if it'll work. They probably aren't even thinking about the mechanics. So the GM may have to do a lot of work to figure out mechanical ways to represent their ideas. And that creative energy can be really fun to experience, especially in a narrative game. In the DMG, there is a player behavior for exploring, but I also think that the archetype of the explorer I'm thinking about also encompasses the instigating. They kind of just want to see what happens. And out of balance, an explorer can start to become just an arguer. A lot of times they'll get frustrated if you try to put your foot down and just create a limitation. So one thing that I found is helpful is framing a limitation as a way to challenge them to be even more creative. And that creativity is really the sense that the explorer brings to the table. They're dissatisfied with playing the same game the same way. They want to see what's possible, even if it's not an optimal way to go about things. Another archetype I call just the friend, the element of earth. In the DMG, this is the socializer. To me, the friend is the one that isn't necessarily excited to play TTRPGs, but they do enjoy the company of everyone around the table. Because of that, they're able to kind of keep the game part of the game in mind and remind everyone why they're there, to have fun. Of course, out of balance, the friend archetype can be disengaged from the game, which can kind of leave a feeling that they're just a vestigial part of it, rather than bringing their own contribution. But sometimes TTRPG players, they accidentally dip into making the game more than it has to be, and a friend is there to remind them that there doesn't need to be this pressure of making it something it shouldn't be. You don't need to be running a critical role-like narrative if everybody else is enjoying what's happening. Ultimately, the way I've kind of come to think of the friend is that they bring a sense of regulation, that things shouldn't dip too far one way or another. They're looking for the right balance of all the elements in order to get the most result. Another archetype is the archetype of the optimizer, which is connected to the element of metal. The optimizer is honestly just looking for the most logical solution to the puzzle put in front of them. If it's combat, of course they're going to take optimal feats. The point of combat is to win and not lose. So of course you'll want the highest armor class, or dealing the most damage, or having the most tools at your disposal to be able to solve problems as they come up. While optimizing is a behavior in the DMG, I also think that optimization is really just an expression of puzzle solving. And so one way to reframe the optimizer if they get out of hand is to try to create an optimized game experience. Meaning, if you have a character that loves the social interaction, rather than trying to find a spell to solve the problem, the optimal experience is to let them have that moment. And of course, there's the famous Stormwind fallacy, which posits that role-playing and min-maxing are not mutually exclusive. A lot of times when I create a character, they are optimized, but they're optimized to fit the story of the character I want to roleplay. I'm just saying that, like, you aren't having less fun just because you're optimizing your character. There's a lot more context that goes into it. The last thing about the optimizer is they will bring a sense of precision to the table. You would be amazed if you have an optimizer on their A game, how quickly their turns pass. Which, for an explorer that's just trying to do something different, or for an actor that's trying to give these long verbose descriptions about how their character uniquely attacks, how much that can be a relief at a table. And lastly, we have the element of water, which is embodied by the archetype of the writer. Now, the difference between the writer and the actor is the actor is trying to get as emotionally close to their character as they can, whereas the writer is kind of getting a broader perspective of all the elements working together, such as the themes of an overarching story, the dynamics between the player characters, and the overall arc the narrative is taking. Because of that broader perspective, sometimes the writer can get meta, which some tables are more comfortable with than others. And the danger with that is sometimes you spend more time talking about the game than actually playing it. And when a writer is on point, they add a sense of meaningfulness and fulfillment to the story that everyone is experiencing. They give a sense of perspective, which a lot of times is how we can discover our best selves, even within a TTRPG. Again, to loop back to knowing versus observing, someone who wants to know their players a lot of times tries to have these 5 archetypes and is trying to have each player assigned to one of them. But if you're just observing, it's a lot easier to see the kind of levels different people have with each one. Like, I can think of a player right now who's like 60% of an actor, 30% of a writer, 10% of an optimizer. yeah, they are a good friend, but they aren't playing the game from the friend's perspective. And a lot of times they aren't pushing bounds. They just enjoy playing out the story of the characters they create. And instead of knowing your players, if all you do is observe, you can also notice how these preferences change over time. For example, when I started, I really was attracted to the archetype of the actor. And because I wasn't paying attention to the rules, the game actually ended up being not a lot of fun at first, because I didn't get the chance to act because my character was always knocked out, which then kind of almost forced me to become an optimizer so that way my character could stay protected so I could act as them. But over time, I actually ended up enjoying more of being a writer, where it's not about what's happening to my character in the moment, it's about how the moment relates to the greater story of what they're experiencing. And if you're a game master, these archetypes are also helpful for your own reflection, and in some ways you kind of have to dip your fingers into all 5 of them. But now I want to hear what you have to say. Is this framework helpful? Or is there some part of the game that I missed that should be its own archetype? Is there one of these 5 archetypes that you identify with? Or does this help describe a player that's been giving you a little bit of trouble? Have you noticed in yourself or other players changes in archetype over time? Let me know in the comments down below. Like I said before, in the description there's a link to the Hit Play Pulse Kickstarter, as well as playtest materials for my TTRPG Swiftguard. I would love to hear what you have to say about Swiftguard, either in the comments of this video or in the Swiftguard community Discord, also in the description. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.